Welcome CSE 121, Fall 2020, to our exercise 15 on functions. We're going to review function definitions, calls, arguments, parameters, and return values, which we haven't talked a lot about yet. And we'll just go over some very simple kind of exercises. Since we did work with turtles already, these are going to be very short little snippets of exercises. And what I'd like you to do first is make sure you read through Chapter 6 of How to Think Like a Computer Scientist, the interactive edition. It's a very good chapter on functions. It talks a lot about the definitions, about parameters, arguments, about fruitful functions, which I'll use that term, what a fruitful function is, which means it returns a value, all of that kind of stuff. There's a number of sections here in the chapter. Don't worry too much about unit testing right now, and some of this other stuff like accumulator pattern. We'll go over a little bit about that, but kind of go through this chapter, kind of pick up what they're talking about, look at some of the examples, and I'm going to show you some examples right now that'll kind of relate to this. And to start off here, what I'm going to do is just go to my Warren and coursework, and I have a repl here that you could click on and fork it. That means you're going to put it into yours because I have some code in here that you're going to work with. And we'll also go over importing a module, which we haven't done yet, other than turtles and random and stuff like that, but making your own modules that we're going to import. So we'll deal with a couple things here. Again, this is real simple stuff. It's not real long, complicated things, rock, paper, scissors, anything like that. Just little kind of examinations of code. So I'm going to click on this, and when you see this come up, it'll say home and WCCC. That's me, and you're going to want to fork it. And if you're logged into your account, and there's my kind of student account, I'm logged into it, it'll put it in there. Now, before you do anything, just go back to your repls. I'll go here and go back to my repls. And here it is. Now, it just got forked in there. So when you fork it, it adds it to your account, as long as you're logged in or as long as you never logged out. And I'm just going to drag it into my CSE 121 and put it in there. And then when I open it up, I'm going to rename it as well. So I'll click on this, function samples last F, and I'll just go up here and put my name in here. So I know it's the one I'm working on. So I'll put my HOMA R up here and hit enter. So now this is the file I'm going to work on. And again, we're just kind of exploring things in here. I'm going to make my text a little bit bigger so you can see it better. Now, you might say, well, what's here? Why did I fork this? There's nothing here. I have all the stuff in a text file. That means it's not real code. That's why you're seeing it all in black, because it's not really a Python file in here. Now, we're going to copy some things into the main.py file. And keep in mind, in repl.it, you can only print out, or output, I should say, from the main.py. But we're going to make some other files, because you might think, well, there's other things here. You can add files. Can't we print them out or output them? We can, but I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to have to import them as modules. So we'll do that as we get started. So first of all, I'm going to take a look at this first one here. This is A. There's 5 here, A, B, C, D, E, and they're real simple things. They're kind of from the chapter, some things I brought in just to explore a little bit. So I'm going to copy it. So you could do Control C or Command C and just take it into main and just paste it. And then you should see it color-coded. And again, this is a very simple function. There's the function definition, the header line, and in the body, there's only x times x. And there's a global variable, which means that it has a global scope. Its variable is declared outside of a function. And then we have our function call. Well, let's see what's going on here with this one. Nothing. There's nothing happening. This is an unfruitful function because there's nothing happening. It's taking x by x. So it really is taking the global variable and putting it in there and saying 2 times 2. But it's just saying 2 times 2 and it's not doing anything. It's not printing it out. We can't even hold this thing here. Even if we could print this out. Now we can actually print out a function call, believe it or not. We can print out a function call. And if you did this, it says none, because nothing is returned. Now, we haven't talked about a return value yet, but there's nothing returned here. That's why when we print out the function call, it says none. There's nothing returned. But if we go here and put return and a space, that will actually end the function and it will return that value. So I could actually print out the function call and return that value. So by returning a value, it makes it fruitful, and basically that function call is kind of like holding on to the value or holding on to the fruit. So if you look at a function like a fruit basket, it's got some fruit in there. So when you print it out, it'll print out its fruit, which is going to be whatever that is. 2 times 2 is going to be 4. So let's see. And there we go. So that's what it's doing. So this return value is actually returning that value. Now, we could have just printed this in here. You could have just printed out x times x, which would have been fine, except you can't really do anything with that then. You know, you run the call, it's kind of dead there. It's kind of dead once you do it. All the function call is doing, and I'll just move it down, is just saying, hey, do whatever that function's doing, and that function's just printing out that value. You can't do anything else with the value. So it's like a worker B here. It's just saying, okay, take that value and just print it out. And that's all it's doing, it's ending there. We can't do anything else with this value now that it's in there. And again, that's using a global variable and then printing this out. So that's why we want to return values. And let's take a look at another one. And before we look at another one, let me put it back the way it was, and I'll show you to do a couple things here. I'll put it back to return, which is fine. And again, you don't have to put that in parentheses because it's not a function. Return isn't a function. It's just returning a value. That's why we have a space there. And if I want to print this out, I'll put that back the way it was. And again, I'm just doing some things here just to look at different options. So now everything's working out. So when you return a value, that means that that function is basically holding that value, and you could print it out. And you could set variables that equal to that and then just print out the variable, and we'll go over that. But let me just see if this works. And again, if we change this, if you made this 4 and you ran it, it would print out 16. So this function call, again, is full of fruit. You're printing out this fruit-filled function, and it's printing out whatever value is returned. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make a new file. So you're going to add a file here, and I'm just going to call it a.py because it was the A example. I'll just call it a.py, and I'll make sure it's a Python file in there. Now, there's nothing in there. I'm going to copy it from here, and actually I'm going to cut it. So if you can do Control X or Command X, I'll do Command X and cut it and empty out that main.py, and I'm going to put it in here. That way I could save it in here in its own file. So it's in its own .py file. And if I run it again, nothing happens. And you might say, well, why is it not running anything? It just worked before. It's because the only thing that's being output is the main.py. That's the only thing that's being output, and there's nothing in the main.py. So how would you get this to print out then? What's the point of having all these extra files here? Well, one thing you could do is if you go to main.py, you could go here and say import A. And A is just kind of short for a.py. You don't have to put the .py. It inherently knows that if it's importing a module, it's going to be a py file. So it just says import A. And that's all it's going to do, and it should just bring in that code and output it. So now if I go here, just the fact that I have import A there, I could go here and I'm in A, and now when I hit run, it works. Now it's not outputting from here, it's actually outputting through the main.py and outputting here. That's what you're seeing. So we'll do that for the rest of the examples here, just to give an extra little sample of working with modules. So that was pretty simple. Now you might say, well, what are we going to do with the next one? Well, we could just switch this off as we go. Now you could import multiple ones and see what happens. We could put a comma B and see what happens, but let's look at the next one. The next one here, I'll just copy this. Now you could copy out of the code.txt. I'm just going to copy it, and I'll make a new file. I won't even go into main.py. I'll just make a new file, and I'll call it b.py, and I'll paste it here. And if I go back to main, just for now, I'm going to put B, just so we could just look at B. Now we could try if we could do A, comma B and see how that works, but just for now, I'll put import B. So now when I work on this one, the main is going to output B, the one that I'm working on right now. So let's just take a look at what we have here. X equals 2, it's still a global variable, meaning it's declared outside of the function. And we have Y equals X times X, which is a local variable, which is declared inside the function. Now right now, this is just a real basic function. Squarenum is being called, and all it's going to do is just print out whatever came up here. So if we run this, it'll work out to 4. Now, if I take this out, if we look at the last example we did, we said, oh, we could print out the function. Why can't we print out the function? This kind of just leaves it dead at this point. So if we wanted to do more, and we had Y equals X times X, if we went here and we said print, we'll print out the function, and we hit run, we get none. So it's still not returning anything. So we mentioned that too. In order to print out a function call, it has to return something. So this function isn't returning anything. So what would it return here? It would actually return Y. So after this, and this is usually the way you'd want to do it, you want to return a value, almost like a variable. So almost this function call is almost like being held like a variable sort of. It's holding a value. So it's now the fruitful function. Now with return, it's fruitful. and this is the fruit, and squarenum is going to be holding that y value. And then you could do other stuff with that y value. So if we print out this, let's see what happens. Okay, now it works. And again, keep in mind it's still going through the main. Now, this is kind of confusing because we have all these parentheses here. Now, it's not that confusing, but it's easier to screw up. What would be better would be to do something like this. Say z equals squarenum. See where I'm going here? And then just print out z. It's just a little easier in terms of the syntax. It's less chance of screwing that up. And then you could do more with z. Then you could do all kinds of stuff with z. So now you're printing out z. One thing I just want to point out here, and maybe I'll make this 4 just so we can see it's different. Now it's going to print out 16. If we went down here and I said, well, let's just print out y, because we created a local variable y, and we're returning y. Can we print out y? Well, already it doesn't look good because we got a red wavy line. It says undefined, and if I run it, I should get an error. It says y is not defined. And you might say, well, why is y not defined? It's right there. It's defined. Well, because it's local in scope. This is global in scope. This is local. It's local because it could only be used in here unless you do something with it outside of here. Now, right now, y is local. It's defined in here. It's declared in here and assigned. And there's no way to get it back out again. So out here, we don't know who y is. It's like a private little club in here that got started. Now, x came from the outside and came in, but y was created on the inside. It's never been on the outside yet. And it has no way to go out on the outside unless z kind of spreads it out. That's how we were able to print it out there because it got carried. The fruit got carried with the function call. But here, it's kind of on its own. We don't know who it is yet. It had to get released into the world by this function call, if you think of it that way. So that's why y is undefined. It's local in scope, and it's not available outside the function, which that's where this is. We're outside the function here. So I'm going to get rid of that. Just run it one more time so it works, and I'll just let that go the way it is. And we'll move on to the next. So here's C. And we're still working with global, so I'm going to copy this again, and I'll make a new file, and I'll call it c.py. Now, I might have done some of the stuff that's in C already, so we might not have to do anything here. And now I'll go in C, and I'll paste it. And I have an extra line here, so I'll take that out. Now, what's different here? We still have a global variable, and we still have this y equals x times x. It looks like what we were doing last time, except it has the word result, other than, z. You could take this and make it z, and I think that's pretty much the one we worked on last time. But one thing I also want to point out here is that you could take this out of here. You could cut that and put it here. And since we're talking about local variables, you could put that in there, and you could say x equals 2. Now, that'll still work. Everything will work here. And now if I print this out, it's 16. Now, why is that 16? You know why it's 16? Even though that's 2, it's because we didn't go to main.py and change it. So let's change it. And we'll see if we could do A, comma, B, C, etc. But right now, we'll just focus on that. So that's import C. So let's go back here and run it again. So it should be 4. Oh, none. Why is it none? Well, first of all, where's the fruit? We have to return it to have fruit. So we have x equals 2, y equals 2 times 2. We're not putting it in here at all. So what do we do to make this fruit into the basket so it's out into the world? We have to return it. So let's return y and print it out. Now that we're returning it, now it's kind of using it. Now that's basically the value that the function call holds. So when you say return y, that means that function call, that's what it equals. It's the same thing as whatever that is. Instead of a function that's procedural and doing things, this is a function now that's holding a value. This function call is holding that value of y. That's why we could say z equals a function call, because z is going to be whatever that is, 4, and then we can print it out. So let's see what happens. Okay, so now that created fruit. So return kind of creates fruit. It creates a fruitful function, and it allows the function call to kind of hold that and then do whatever you want with it. Then you could print it out. You could say z. Let's try this. Let's say z, which is actually 4. Let's say z times x. Let's go throw x in there because we were using x. And wait a minute. What's that? X is undefined? What do you mean x is undefined? Now x is undefined because we put x in here and it's local and it's not available out here because this isn't local. This is global. We're out on the main line here. When you're not indented and you're outside a function, you're global. And if you try to print it, it doesn't recognize it. It has no way of getting X out of here. X is stuck in here and has no way of getting out. And no, you can't say return Y, return X, and stuff like that. If you need to get more values, there's other things you're going to have to do. But typically, you're going to hold one value out of there. So we can't really use X there. Now, if X was out here, we could. If we took this back out and we just left it out here globally, and I'll get rid of that line, then it's going to use the one from here. And now it's saying Z times X. So now it's saying 4 times 2. And if you change this, let's see if we change it to that, now it's saying 64. And it's always using that X. Now, if we put X in here and changed X to something else, we wouldn't be able to use it. But because it's global, here it's going global to global. So it's just taking the 4 here and putting it there. So it's whatever value we got from the Y, whatever return value, which now is Z, now we can multiply that and get 64. So this is really 16 now because we used 4 in here. 4 is going here, and doing 4 times 4 is 16. Now it's doing 16 times 4 is 64. So that's what's happening in there because we're going global to global. But if you put that in there and you make it local, it won't work. All right, I'll leave that one go. We've done enough with that. Now let's move on to D. Now I don't see anything global in this one. Copy this, and I'll add a new file. And I'll just call it d.py, and I'll paste the code in there. And before I forget, I'll go back to main, and I'll say import D. So now it's going to print out anything we do in D. Now let's see what's happening here. We got squarenum. Now this is squaring a num of X. Oh, look what we got here. We have, remember what that is? That's the parameter. And this thing here is the argument, or what they also call the actual parameter. They sometimes call these formal parameters. These are arguments. And parameter is kind of the placeholder, and this is actually the value. Look at it that way. It's almost like saying X equals 2. Because remember, we've been using X equals 2. We used it globally outside of here, then we used it locally. This is using it locally because you're using it inside here. You're going right from function to function, and it's being used inside here. This, like I used in another example, this is the same thing as if you said X equals 2 and you didn't have anything in there. Because if you don't send an argument. That way you're basically doing the parameter and argument right in the same place here. So if we did that, if we said def squarenum and then said X equals 2, it's going to say Y equals 2 times 2 is 4. It's going to return the Y, which is 4, and it's going to print it out. Now here we're using result instead of Z, which is fine, and that should work. And that works fine. Now also, you could do this, and this is a little more convenient. You don't want to be putting all kinds of expressions inside there as parameters. That way you could just hold this value, especially if you have more than one. You know, if you have more than one value in there, which we've done with the turtles already, that way I could put something in here and you're kind of throwing it out here. So here the argument's getting thrown into the parameter, and that's giving it its value, because right now it has no value. Like if you went here and run it, you're getting it because it's requiring a positional argument, and it's looking for a value, and it has no place to get a value. It's like in baseball, the guy's holding up his glove at first base and nobody threw the ball to him. So he's not getting anything thrown over to him. This is where you got to throw the ball over to him. So he's waiting for a value. X is waiting for a value from here. So we got to give him a value. And if he had something like X, Z or something like that, you'd have to give him 2 values. If you did something like that, you get an error saying it requires, it's requiring 2 and you're only giving 1 or something like that. So, you have to be aware of that as well. But right now, we can do that. So this is a parameter, and this is the argument that's getting sent, and it's really the value that's getting sent there. So we're basically just doing the variable just kind of backwards. We're sending it right here. So you could do 4 and run it through here, and that should be 16. Or anything that you want. So as long as we're still doing a little expression here of Y equals X times X, so we're doing an expression, and we're creating this local variable Y, and we're returning the value of Y, and then it's done. Y is done, and it's just sending it on with the function call. And the function call is actually getting called, and it's saying, okay, let's run this function except use 4. And then it runs the function, it uses 4, and it puts it through here. If you went through here and you tried 6, and you did 6 times 6, that should be 36. So it's squaring it each time. So I think with this one, we just kind of worked on a argument and a parameter. And we did that before with the turtles, so this isn't anything new, but that's kind of how that works. And let's look at the last one. I'll go to my code. I'll go down to E. I'll copy that, and I'll make a new file, and I'll just call it e.py. and I'll paste it, and we'll see what's going on here. And before I do anything else, I'll go here and make sure this is E, that it's going to print out E. And I'll go back to E. Now again, we have our function definition, and it's using two parameters. It's using a parameter x and a parameter power. Now again, this is the same thing as if you did x equals 2 and power equals 4, and you had nothing in here, and you didn't send any arguments. You could do that. And if I did this, let's just see what's going to happen. It's going to say y equals x. Asterisk asterisk actually means to the power of. So it's going to say x, which is 2 to the power of 4. So that means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, whatever that is. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So that should be 16, 2 to the 4th power. And that works. And what we really did, instead of doing that, was instead of putting the arguments right up there and declaring them inside there, we put them here. And now they have to match up. If you have 2 parameters up here, you have to have 2 arguments here. If you're missing one, you're going to get that error. If you just put 1 here, you're going to get that error saying is missing a required positional argument. So you're missing something for power. It even says power. It's looking for it. It knows that x is 2, and it's like, okay, where's the one for power? So we have to make sure that we have 2 and 2. We have that matched up. And if you have 3, you have to have 3. So again, what's happening here is we're using this in here. We're using power in here. We're using x in here. And we're getting our result back. So this is sending 2 arguments and into 2 parameters, and now we're just printing out our result, and we're using result as a variable that represents our function call. So that's all we're doing here, and there's our 16. And that's all we really need to do. Again, it's just a little bit of exploration into return values here is really the main thing. We're kind of reviewing arguments and parameters a little bit. But the other thing I want to look at here, what if we did put A, comma, B, comma, C, comma, D? What if we did all of them? Let's see if that would work. I'll just hit run. Oh, there they go. So it actually prints them all out. So you can import all of them and print out all your values. So that works fine. So if you wanted to know what they are, we could have put something in the print things and said A equals, B equals. Now you kind of know what they are. So that's a good way to finish it up. So that's the end of this exercise. Again, it's just a little review. It's kind of like a lesson like we'd be doing on the whiteboard or the blackboard at school. So that's all we're doing right here is just going over some stuff just to try and reinforce what you're reading in here. So make sure you read this as well. And I have another presentation about this stuff just to reinforce this a little bit more, just so you understand how functions work and also following the flow of execution in functions. So we're going to be doing that as well. But if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, that's 15. When you're done, you could just share it. Remember, go over here to share and scroll down. Skip this because this always looks like somewhere where you'd copy. Make sure you copy the link down here. And then when you go back to my warn, which I don't know, did I close it up? So when you go back there, you'll just do your typical add comment, insert a link, paste it in there, choose new window, and you'll be done.